everyone. My name is Miguel Myers. Welcome to my horror confessional, where every week I will have a guest come on and talk about one classic horror movie that they haven't seen and why. We'll discuss the movie, the actors, and probably get off topic quite a bit. Once I believe that they have properly atoned, I will absolve them of their horror movie sin. Today, we have Richard Z Santos. Richard's debut novel, Trust Me, was a finalist for the Writers League of Texas Book Awards and was named one of the best debuts of the year by Crime Reads. He's the editor of the collection A Night of Screams, Latino Horror Stories, out in June 2023. And that just came out a couple of days ago, right?
Yeah, just a couple of days.
Yeah. And then he is the executive director of Austin Batcave, an organization that provides creative writing workshops to students in under-resourced areas. He is a former board member of the National Book Critics Circle and has judged contests for the Kirkus Prize. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. The NEA and many more. Recent work can be found in Austin Noir by Akashic Books, Lone Stars Rising, HarperCollins, Texas Monthly, Crime Reads, and more. In a previous career, he taught high school English and social studies. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, so that's a lot we just went over. One thing I wanted to touch on, and I want to touch on a lot of this stuff, but specifically two things. The collection, A Night of Screams, Latino Horror Stories. When we first got into contact and you told me about this anthology, I was so excited for it. And I was very lucky, and you're very, very gracious to give me a copy so I can read it. And I've read 3 or 4 of the stories so far, and I'm loving it. I was wondering if you could tell me a bit about the process of making that anthology and why you felt that it needed to be done.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're really in like a new, I don't know, is golden age the right term? That almost sounds like too gilded, right? Literally, like a golden age of horror, though, because it's true, where there's a lot of really interesting things happening in lots of different avenues, right? Movies, podcasts like this one and others, audio drama podcasts, which I'm a big fan of. And of course, writing. And I realized that there were a lot of Latino horror writers out there, a lot of Latinx horror writers who are doing some really interesting stuff, and that I'm a big fan of. And I'm a big fan of this, to me, it really does feel like a new sort of like era in horror literature. For me, it seems like the kids in high school who are reading Stephen King and Garcia Marquez, right? Who were reading Vonnegut and watching like the Hellraiser movies. They're all like grown up and writing novels and short stories now. And all those things are all just like blended together. And there's some really cool stuff. And so I had an idea of trying to put together a collection that highlighted some Latinx horror writers. And like the initial hook I had, which I think is still present in the introduction and in some of the stories, is about like hybrids, right? I feel like the great Latino philosopher Gloria Anzaldúa, a lot of her work is about the borderlands, like the physical and psychic borderlands, where all these new cultures come together to make something completely different. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of like the modern Latino experience, right? And that's also kind of classic horror territory, right? That is scary things. They're not just one thing, they're also something else, right? The alien isn't just alien, it's also like an incredibly psychopathic like killer, right? The house isn't just a house, it's also a portal to hell, or something like Frankenstein, right? Is the ultimate horror hybrid. And so I started reaching out to writers, some of whom are established in the horror field, like V. Castro. And others hadn't written any horror before, like Ruben Degollado, who's got one of the first stories in here. He wrote me back and was like, I've never done this, but I kind of want to give it a shot. And he wrote a great zombie story set like along the border.
Did you have the deal with the publisher already, or did you have to? So backing up a little bit, I know nothing about publishing. So sure. My question is, do you have the project already completed and then you reach out to a publisher, or do you kind of work side by side with the publisher?
So I know that for some publishers and some editors, you can do it that way, where you gather the stories first and then find a home for it. I was fortunate enough so Arte Publico Press published my novel in 2020. and they've been around for 50 years or so. You know, they call themselves the oldest publisher of Hispanic literature in the country. And they, I knew that they haven't published a lot of horror in their catalog. They've got some like books for like horror books for kids and young adults, but not a lot of adult horror, and no horror anthologies. And I like knew them because they published my book. And so like I knew like, hey, these people are going to open my email. So I emailed the editors over there and was like, hey, this is my idea. What do y'all think? And they wrote me back like the next day saying like, okay, sure, let's do it. And then it took some time to like figure out, you know, deadlines and so on and everything that comes from there. But they were open to the idea right away. And, you know, I don't know, a year and a half later or so, there's a book out in the world that y'all can order, and maybe also ask your local bookstore to stock as well.
Yeah, last week's guest, Leticia Urieta, is actually in your collection, and I had a chance to read her story, and knowing her based off of our conversation, what she goes through on a daily basis, and then, you know, reading that story that she wrote, I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. It was a great story, and I really enjoyed the stories that I've read in the anthology so far. Have you had a sense of what the how the public has received the anthology? I know it just came out a week, but you know, there's been advanced praise and stuff.
There was a good review in Publishers Weekly a few months ago, which is one of those like pre-publication, that's what they're called, a pre-publication like trade, like a kind of like review magazine basically, which like Publishers Weekly and Kirkus Reviews and various others, like they can really set the tone for books months before they come out, and they enjoyed it. They liked it a lot. It's gotten some good attention from other horror bloggers and other like Latinx writers, and that's really exciting. And we're going to start hopefully doing some events here soon with some of our local horror bookstores, like Ghoulish in San Antonio, or Curio Morvosa, which is in Taylor, just outside of Austin. So people seem to be enjoying it. Yeah, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, that's great. So tell me a little bit more about the process of picking the stories. Like, how did you decide this story is right, this one isn't, that sort of thing? Also, as you're an author as well, a really good author, because I read your story in Austin Noir that I want to talk about later, but how do you resist the urge to also put in one of your stories in an anthology like this?
Yeah, I'll start there. I mean, I really wanted to have a story in here, and I think that would have been fine. I think a lot of editors of collections like slip their own work in there, and that's okay. A lot don't. I think there's not really like an established best practice on that. And I think my only excuse is that I didn't like meet my own deadline. Like I had a story, but between like the other things I'm working on and my work with Austin Batcave and other things, I just didn't get the story done. So I didn't include it, which is both I feel personally sort of like, oh, come on, man, you gotta make your own like print deadlines, but also, you know, the editor is also supposed to be there, but not there too much. And so the process for this was twofold. I put out a call for submissions, because I knew that I wanted people that I didn't know to submit, right? And I wanted people who didn't have a lot of publications to submit as well. I didn't want this to be just like really established horror writers. And so I put out that call, which I spread through social media, and Arte Publico publicized it a little bit. I put that out and got probably, I should look up this number, probably 30 stories through that slush pile, as they call it. And it really was like a good blend of like, oh, this person has got stories published in different horror publications, like Pedro Iniguez. He's got stuff all over like the internet and lots of horror stuff. I wasn't familiar with his work before he submitted, so that was exciting to come through. But also people who didn't really have a lot or any publications at the time of submissions, like Sydney Macias or Flor Salcedo. And so that was really great. You know, some of the stories that I really loved came in through that submission, like Tamales by Jose Alanis, which is this super bizarre sci-fi. It's very kind of Brian Evanson-y, if you've ever read any of his stories, where he can be very grounded in horror, but he can also do like horror in space really well in a really abstract way. That's one of my favorite stories in here. If you pick up
That's
the
very
collection,
prescient based on the movie you picked today, Horror in Space, right?
yeah, that's true. That's true. Tamales is a great story. I think if you pick up the collection and start to read it, you're going to spend the first page being like, I don't know what the hell is happening. Like literally, I don't know why these words are in this order, but stick with it and it really unlocks. Indian Blood by Marcos Damian Leon came in through email. That's a really great story. But then I also wanted to reach out to people I knew who were working in horror, like Leticia, like V. Castro. Also some just poets that I knew whose work I appreciated, like Cloud Cardona or Monica Teresa Ortiz or Ruben Quesada. They're poets and they're brilliant poets. They're not horror writers, but I was like, I want to include some poetry in there. I want to include some like kind of hybrid stuff.
Mhm.
Do y'all have anything? And I really like what they sent in.
When you're doing a project like this, is there any like story or subject matter or topic that you're like is off limits and perhaps we're not going to publish in it, but publish the story in the anthology?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think as an editor and compiler, you're going, your own tastes are going to come in. I didn't really go in with a lot of, no, I don't want zombies, forget zombies. Like I didn't come in with any of those like horror tropes that I didn't want to mess with. Although I know I didn't want to publish like 15 La Llorona stories, right? I didn't want to publish 15 Chupacabra stories, but I knew I was going to be mad as hell if I didn't have one or two of both of those, right? Like you got to have something in there. I knew I wanted like a haunted house story. I knew I wanted this sort of just creepy story, like the kind of stories that are out there now where some people call them uncanny, right, or just weird fiction. So not necessarily Jason with a knife or a ghost like tearing people apart, but those sort of stories where the world is just not quite right. I knew I wanted some of those. In terms of my own taste, like I knew I wasn't going to be into anything that was too like gory or extreme just for the sake of being extreme. That doesn't do a lot for me generally. I knew I didn't want to get anything that was messing with too many like Mexican or Latino stereotypes in ways that weren't like helpful. I don't think I really got a lot of submissions that I didn't like based on content. If anything, it was just like, okay, if I know that this story is really great and I'm going to have to include it, that almost is like, okay, well, this other story can't make it, right? Like the more you say, yes, I really want to get this in here, that just limits the amount of space on the boat. So like, some animals aren't going to make it onto the ark, even if they're good. Even if I'm sure if I go back into that slush pile, I'll find a story and I'll be like, what the hell? Why didn't I put this in here? I should have made room for this. But not everything.
Perhaps a volume 2.
Yeah.
Are all of these stories originals or are there any reprints?
Some were reprinted from like they first made their appearance in like on smaller websites or in zines.
Gotcha.
I'm trying to think of some examples of that. Oh, Chola Salvation by Stella Gonzalez, which is a great story on here. It's one of the longer ones in here. In that story, a girl, like a teenage girl, is working at her parents' restaurant, and in walks Frida Kahlo and the Virgin Mary, but the Virgin Mary is all sort of like chola'd out with like the hair and the makeup and stuff like that.
I love it.
That is the title collection of her story, Chola Salvation, which was also published by the Publico Press. So most of them are new and original, but a couple of them appeared somewhere along the way.
Yeah, and not to say that I have a problem with reprints. I know some editors who are like no reprints, but it's like I don't care if I love it there, I'm going to love it here as well. Yeah. So the process of being an editor, is that as opposed to being an author, did you have any preference? Did you is it just like two sides of yourself, or have you done editing in the past?
I haven't done editing to this extent. I've done some freelance editing where someone might hire me to read their novel and give like feedback, that kind of like deep like structural feedback. And that's a different process than
Right.
compiling like a story like for a book like this. Because if someone is paying me to read their book and tell them what's wrong with it, then I'm gonna go deep. I'm gonna go like real like into and really like challenge, it's not just about word choice and comments at that point. It's like structural stuff, deep like characterization stuff. So that's really like a really heavy critical eye, which is usually what those writers are looking for. They may not always like what they hear, but that's what they're looking for.
Yeah.
For something like this, so many of the stories are coming to you, polished and drafted and like from professional writers, like Ruben or Ivelisse Rodriguez, who's has a great story in here as well. Like these are people who know what they're doing and been doing it for a while. Tony Plummer, right? Richie Narvaez. They're going to send you something that's in really good shape. And so for some of the stories in here, it really is more of a like grammar check of like, typos or some consistencies. Does this character have the same name? A few others might need some tightening or just some clarity. Like, I don't really know what happens in this section. Can we clean this up a little bit? But the trick is always not to rewrite the story, certainly. Like, I would have written about Frida and the Virgin Mary showing up at a taqueria this way. No,
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's not my story, right? It's Estella's story. Let's let her like tell it in her voice and her style, which is a tricky balance for an editor. You got to be there and make sure things are in good shape, but you can't take over.
I know that you love all of these stories equally, just like you love, all parents love their children the same.
You're
Understandable.
going to ask me to pick a favorite, aren't you?
I'm going to ask you, if somebody were going to pick up the book and you wanted to show them a shining example of how great the anthology is, what would be the one story you would point them to?
Yeah, interesting.
Besides the introduction, right? Because the introduction is expertly written. Oh yeah, you wrote that, right?
Yeah. I like the way you phrase this question too, because you're not asking for favorites. You're asking about what like embodies the anthology.
Yeah.
So like a story like Tamales might be a little bit too weird for people to be their first entry in there. Like you want to warm up to that. That's why I put it on like page 55. But I'm stalling. Can you tell that I'm stalling? I think that, I kind of think that one of the most fun things about an anthology is the order. And those first two stories, Dark Lord of the Rainbow by Monique Quintana, which is like kind of a long flash piece. It's like 2 pages. And Migrants by Ruben Degollado, which is like a more traditional short story size. I think I put those two first because I think they both set a tone.
Okay.
Dark Lord of the Rainbow is about the story about like, it's a take on that story where the girl sneaks out and goes to the dance hall and dances with the devil.
Yes. Yes.
Classic like Mexican American folklore.
My friend who's hosted on the show with me before, Anthony Jerome M, that's one of his favorite stories, and he's like recounted it on various podcasts. So I'm sure he's gonna absolutely love to hear that.
Yeah, it's a classic. It's a good one.
Yeah. All right, so we will continue this conversation on the Sunday School Sessions, which is the Patreon only show. If you're interested in something like that, patreon.com/my horror confession. My horror confessional, sorry. But I did want to ask you first if you could tell me a bit about your debut novel, Trust Me.
Oh, sure. It's set in Santa Fe. I think it is basically a political thriller / family novel at the same time. My mom's family is from New Mexico, which has a role, honestly, in my like love of horror. And I'd spent a year living in Santa Fe and working on a political campaign. My career before teaching was in politics. And so the novel is sort of like, rooted in those experiences. But basically, before Trust Me begins, this group in Santa Fe has gone through all the hoops, managed to secure some tribal land to build an airport for Santa Fe. and they're digging, it's moving along until they find like a skeleton, like an old, like centuries old skeleton. And since it's tribal land, since it's a pueblo, that has to shut everything down, which means all the people financing this airport are losing like millions and millions of dollars like a day. And the novel is basically about the power vacuum that exists because of it, right? There's the evil billionaire who wants to get the project going again. There's this dude who shows up from Washington, D.C. trying to like do some damage control and who finds himself in way over his head. There's a local guy working construction on the airport who finds himself broke and starts making bad decisions. And it all just sort of spirals out of everyone's control from there.
That sounds really fun. That sounds like a lot of fun. What genre would you say that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's this is actually one of the I think like challenges with this book, but it's the novel that I wanted to write. There's definitely like a with the guy who works on construction, there's definitely like a family like drama like plot in there.
Okay.
But there's also like the political and financial intrigue with all the stuff happening at the airport site and what's actually like going on at the airport site.
Yeah.
Plus it gets in, so there's some sort of noirish elements in there as well. The billionaire's got like a bodyguard henchman who's like definitely like the constant threat of violence in there. So, you know, I call it a political thriller.
Okay. Yeah.
And
I mean,
I've been
that sounds
forced to like narrow it down.
that sounds like a lot of fun. I mean, I imagine it's something like akin to like a Elmore Leonard novel or something like that. Sounds like it. Yeah, I haven't read it yet. I'm definitely going to be doing it, but just the way you're describing it sounds like some of the Leonard novels that I've read in the past.
Yeah, I've heard that before actually, which is a huge compliment.
Yeah. And then I did want to talk to you also about your story in Austin Noir, Rush Hour.
Mm-hmm.
I read that. So I met you in person at I don't know if it was the release, it was a reading from the book. I was there with Andrew Hilbert, who also appears in the short story collection. And so I was able to meet you, and I was able to read Rush Hour. So if people don't know, these noir books from Akashic Books, they do like Austin Noir, Houston Noir, Boston Noir, that sort of thing, where each story takes place in a community of that city. So for Austin, you drew the Domain, which I absolutely despise the Domain. And I love that your character also kind of despised the Domain. But first, I wanted to start off by asking you, how do you draw? Were you assigned the Domain, or were you asked for the Domain? What was the process like for that?
Yeah. So, and just in case you don't know, the Domain is a kind of high-end shopping mall. It's one of those open air shopping malls where you have to like drive to the stores, and there's like a Louis Vuitton store, and there's like there's a Gucci store and so on. No, we were able to choose. You know, I think there might have been some conflict if if everybody chose the same neighborhood, like if everybody chose UT, then the editors might have had some like scrambling that they needed to do.
Yeah.
But I was pretty sure nobody was going to choose the Domain because it's not that old. I mean, it's only been open like 10 or 12 years or something like that. And it's the kind of place that everyone who goes there is like, oh my God, it's so hard to get in and out, walking around everywhere. Everyone complains about it, but it's also super crowded all the time. And I live fairly close to it. And I don't go there often, but I feel like I end up there a couple times a year.
Okay.
And every time I'm there, I'm like, it's a very strange place. I mean, like there's roads like going through the shops, there's people everywhere. It's a weird sort of like, you know, any place where everyone is expected to spend a lot of money is always just kind of like capitalism at its strangest to me. And there's tons of parking garages there. And the parking garages, I think, are very strange places. And I knew I basically immediately was like, okay, when the editors reached out to me to contribute a story, if I was interested, I immediately was like, okay, the Domain in a parking garage. And that's all I had. But I knew that was going to be where most of it would be set. I even thought maybe all of it would be set there. Like the demands of, I think, story structure made me be like, okay, I have to leave the parking garage at some point. And so that's where immediately where I wanted to set something.
The Domain, I've been there once and I'll never go back again. But you describe it as like retail shopping on the bottom and like a lot of apartment buildings on
Yeah.
top, right? And there's other places like that in Austin, and I've seen it in other cities as well. But to me, it feels like almost like an enclosed, not enclosed, but it's like almost as a mini city, so that the residents that live in those high rises in those apartment buildings don't need to leave don't need to leave their little enclave. And it always feels very, very racial to me,
Yeah.
because the type of the majority of the people that live there are white. Majority of Austin is white, it feels like.
Yeah.
And
It's true.
and so they don't want to have to leave. They don't want to have to mingle with any of the rest of the city. They they don't want to have to spend their money in these minority communities. They spend their money in their communities. And I'm always really, really angry about that. So just
Yeah.
the concept of the Domain and other places like that always piss me off.
No, I think you're right. I mean, these brand new kind of bubbles, and they're expensive. Like, I mean, some of the shops in the Domain are just like normal shops or whatever, right? Like they're not all like whatever Gucci stores, but all the residences, and there's thousands of apartments there. They're super expensive for brand new small places, and all these brand new apartments, it's just that paper thin sort of luxury, right? It's all that fake marble, a lot of grays and whites, and a lot of like done quickly and cheaply, but are super expensive. And so yeah, a lot of transplants, a lot of people new to Austin end up there spending a lot of money in this one bubble, like you're saying. I think that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. All right. I want to move on. But before we do, could you tell people how they can follow you, social medias, how they could support you, how they can buy your books, all your projects, stuff like that?
Yeah. So I have a website which I need to update urgently, richardzsantos.com. But I'm most active on Twitter, although God knows, like every day, it just seems like, is today going to be the last day of Twitter?
That is Twitter, yeah.
I've managed to secure a Blue Sky invitation, so I'm over there too. And for the horror collection, I know if you're in Austin, you can find, trust me, at Book People, and I think a couple other local shops. I think A Night of Screams will start appearing in some local Austin bookstores as well. But Arte Publico is a small press, and they're a small press that publishes Latino writers exclusively. So they're not, Barnes and Noble doesn't stock their books. Most of your like major bookstores aren't going to be there. So one thing that y'all can do is go into your local bookstore and request it, order it, tell the booksellers about it. That is hugely influential. The books are available on Amazon and stuff, of course, and they're the biggest bookseller in the world for a reason. And honestly, like, I'm not going to judge you if you get them that way, though. But going in and ordering it, even if it's not in stock, asking your local bookstore to order it, whatever the book is so much more impactful for the author, for the publisher, for the genre, for the type of book it is, and for that bookstore than just ordering it at home.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, your local bookstore, your independent bookstore is going to be your best bet. Even if they don't carry it, they can order it for you. Now let's get on to the confessional part of it. So you're here to confess to your horror sin of never having watched Jason X. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So let's back up a bit. And could you tell me what your history is with horror? Did you grow up liking it? Does your family, support you? Was it friends, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So, I was born in 1980. So, right, there's those like formative like years between what, I don't know, let's say like 77 when Jaws came out and all the way through, just say a decade, right? To like, or 12 years, to like 89 or so, when Stephen King takes off, Peter Straub takes off, Dean Koontz takes off, but also like all these horror movies start hitting like the mainstream as well. Halloween, Alien in 79, Halloween right after there. Then you're getting into to Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, the Hellraiser movies start coming up. And so it really feels like that was a really exciting time for horror. Horror started actually appearing places outside of like weird grindhouse movies and like just like the pulp, the back section of like bookstores.
Yeah.
So I feel like I really came of age during that time. I definitely was reading Stephen King really young. I remember over the summers, my mom would send me off to visit her family in New Mexico for like a month or like 6 weeks. I would just like be in New Mexico with my grandparents or aunts and uncles. And I remember one summer I was at my aunt's house in a small town, which basically was the middle of nowhere, not a lot happening, no like movie theaters, no nothing really to do during the day or at night. And I took 2 or 3 books with me, and I remember thinking, oh, this will be fine. Oh, I'm only here for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And I think one of them was probably The Stand. One of them was at least one of them was one of those huge brick of Stephen King books. I think I was like 12 or so, 13 maybe. But I like had nothing else to do. So I read all 3 of them in like less than a week and was just bored out of my mind. And my aunt was like, well, here, I've got this. And she pulled a box of books out of her closet, just cardboard box stacked with Stephen King, more Stephen King books and Peter Straub books, and probably some like Tom Clancy books or things like that.
Yeah.
And tore through them. And that was, I feel like I definitely got to horror first through the books.
Okay.
And like the movies came on shortly after that.
Well, that's cool to hear. So I'm assuming those books belong to your aunt.
Yeah.
So she was also into horror as well, or at least horror novels, right?
Yeah, I think that's actually a good question, because I feel like Stephen King got so popular there that when just sort of like the random reader is a Stephen King fan, does that make them really into horror? Like, would they consider themselves a
I see
horror
what you're
fan
saying.
or
Yeah.
just a Stephen King fan? I don't really know. That's a good question, though.
It was like so ubiquitous in the culture that
Yeah.
you could, I mean, you go to Walgreens and a Stephen King book is there. You go to, CVS and it's there. So
And
I
it
see what
wasn't
you mean.
shameful. It wasn't like in the way that maybe old pulp horror movies or books maybe were in previous decades,
Yeah.
right? For kids or something like that.
So when do you think the horror movies started to creep in to your experience?
I remember watching like snippets here and there, like either at home at my house, like HBO or Showtime or whatever. And you just flipping around and watching like a sequence and probably I kind of remember getting like freaked out and changing it, right? Freddy Krueger always like frightened the hell out of me. So it would be one of those like click to it and watch a couple minutes and then like click away to like something else and
Yeah,
then click
yeah.
back. So like you're experiencing it in all these like snatches, or watching those movies with like friends or cousins or something where I remember like I remember this sort of like vague concern that like we shouldn't be watching Halloween 3 or Nightmare on Elm Street like 2 or Friday the 13th 4 or whatever, maybe because of the nudity, maybe because of the violence. So it'd be like watching it and then wait, is someone coming? And then like we'd have to change the channel real quick.
Yeah, yeah,
Friends
yeah.
probably didn't care, but there was a little bit of that like thrill of, oh, I'm watching something that's rated R and we're 11 or 12 or whatever. And that was really exciting. And I think in terms of a more sort of like adult perspective, I remember being in my early 20s and rewatching, or really probably watching for the first time, movies like Halloween and Alien, and the horror movies start getting, I think, really good again in the beginning of the 21st century, and realizing, oh, these are like good movies. They're not all good movies. We're going to talk about that here shortly. But realizing like, oh, Halloween's actually like really well directed and like the performances are actually like good. Realizing that there's something there. And then movies like The Ring comes out, movies like The Blair Witch Project come out. And it's like, no, these aren't just like jump scares and like Tom Savini makeup effects and exploding heads. There's like actually quality filmmaking happening here, which was just an exciting, I think people realize that at different times. I remember realizing that in my 20s and it being like really, really exciting and fun.
Yeah, and for you, so I don't want to assume uh your background, but for me, I'm Mexican and Puerto Rican, and in my family, it was kind of frowned upon, especially like in my with my aunts and uncles and sort of stuff. Like,
Yeah.
eso es del diablo, right? Or stuff like that, right? That's not like that's not stuff that you should be listening to or watching or reading, that sort of thing. I find that that happens in minority communities a lot. Did you experience any of that?
Not from my mom, who was a huge Stephen King fan and liked horror movies as well. She was very cool, but certainly, yeah, like my grandparents didn't like those movies or those books. Some of my aunts and uncles, which very religious, conservative Catholic family in New Mexico, some of them were definitely reading them. Some of them definitely thought those were books by the devil. Some are like probably both. Some probably had that like, oh my God, I'm going to go to hell, but this is a good book and I want to finish it. Or I'm just, I'm going to watch Friday the 13th or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, not a lot of like, stop, you can't do this, it's bad for your soul for me, but I definitely I knew it was out there for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's great because some of the people I've interviewed, not all Hispanic, but some of the people of color that I've interviewed in the past have said that yeah, their family completely was like angry with them for reading it and trying to be like actively stopping them from reading that sort of stuff. And so I'm always interested to know what other people of color's experience has been, and it's great to hear that you didn't really have that much of a resistance, which is great. So with Jason X, you hadn't seen this movie. So is there a particular reason why? Like, had it been on the top of the list, but other stuff just kept going on top, or are you not a Jason fan, or what was the process? Why had you not seen Jason X at this point of your career? Because you said you're born in the 1980s, so you're in your 40s.
Plenty of opportunities
Plenty
to
of
see
time.
Jason X.
Yeah.
It is now 22 years old, this movie. This movie could drink if it was an living entity. No, I had never seen Jason X because it's Jason Goes to Space and it looks freaking awful. I mean, it looks like just the worst sort of Jason Part 10. How many Part 10s are there out there that people are really excited to watch?
I think the Fast and Furious, did they just come out with a Part 10 or something like that?
Shit, yeah,
that's quality right there.
Certainly like the James Bond movies are into the times. I'll be excited for Mission Impossible 10 when it happens when Tom Cruise is 75. But no, it's the kind of movie where I remember when it came out, that I just kind of knew, okay, that's going to be like you, at a certain point with the Friday the 13th movies, like everybody knows what they are. And I think with this one, it's like Jason Goes to Space. Okay, so that's going to be pretty cheesy. Some people are going to watch it because it'll be different because it's Jason in space, but this is still going to be pretty bad. But I remember being excited for like Jason versus Freddy, and I definitely watched that. Or The Hook. I remember The Hook of Jason Goes to Hell. It's such a like extreme title, right? That was part 9. That was just before this one. And I remember watching that. I remember watching that in the theater. But something about like Jason Goes to Space was just like a kind of a bridge too far in my fandom at the time.
Yeah, I mean it's silly, right? It's where all the horror franchises go to die, like Leprechaun in Space or Hellraiser in Space. So
Hellraiser in Space,
yeah. So it's like, yeah, it's a really silly concept, and so it's hard to take serious. And I was kind of the same way. Like for me, Friday the 13th was never my franchise.
Yeah.
I had only really seen all of the movies within the last decade.
Sure.
Like Halloween is my franchise, but like Friday the 13th, I don't know. Jason himself it seemed kind of boring to me, which is kind of silly because Michael Myers is almost the exact same thing. They don't talk and they wear a mask, right? But Michael's my guy. But was it specifically Jason X that you hadn't seen and you'd seen the rest of the series? Or had you just seen like part
Yeah.
1 or 2 or 3 of Friday the 13th.
Yeah, so this is when like the confessional gets deeper and darker. So I went into this knowing, in my head, I told myself, okay, well, I've seen part 1, and I'm pretty sure I've seen the others, several of the others, but let me go back and rewatch them, or at least some of them. And in rewatching the first one, I sat down to it thinking like, I've seen this before, but I didn't really have, like when you watch a movie you haven't seen in a long time, it's like, oh yeah, I remember this scene, or I remember this was funny, or I remember that freaked me out. I didn't really have those sort of like flashbacks with part 1, but it all felt familiar.
Okay.
And so I'm like, wait a minute, somehow this feels familiar, but I don't remember it. Is this just because these movies are all kind of the same, and so they're all just some kind of big blend? Certainly I remember like the stuff that has like emerged into pop culture from the first one, like Jason jumping out in the very last scene in the first one, when he jumps onto the boat from
Whoa. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert for part 1. Like I knew that was coming, and so I watched part 1, and like I certainly knew the hook of who the actual killer is. Spoiler alert again. So I finished part 1 and was like, well, I have to actually watch a movie where Jason's in it. And then I watched part 2, and I was like, oh, I don't think I've ever actually seen part 2. Or maybe clips here and there, like I said, from like clicking around and being scared with my cousins. And then I was like, well, he doesn't even have the hockey mask in this one, so now I have to watch part 3. And then watch part 3, which is the 3D one, where the focus is on like, what can you like thrust at the camera more than anything. Yeah. And then I was like, well, I may as well just keep this train rolling. And I read these like people being like, part 4 is actually secretly the best one. And I was like, okay, fine, let's watch part 4, which actually maybe is the best one. It's certainly, the part 4 is the one that feels most like a professional movie.
Which one's part 4? Is that New Blood or something?
Part 4 is, yeah, New Blood. It's one with Corey Feldman.
Yeah.
It's the one where like the camera work, like the color correction and stuff, it looks like a modern movie more than the others. And then everybody was like, part 5 is awful. That's when like the Corey Feldman's character is older and resuscitates Jason. I watched most of part 6, which is when it gets in a full-on self-parody mode. Part 6 is like the first Jason comedy, which like Kevin Williamson said was an influence on Scream, actually, which I kind of get. Jason is so famous by part 6 that one of the characters sees Jason is like, no, I know what I'm not supposed to do in a horror movie, so I'm not going to do it, which is basically, I think, where the Scream franchise was born. But yeah, so I've watched 6 complete Jason movies in the past like week and a half, and some others, and I kind of actually want to go back and rewatch Jason versus Freddy now when we're done with this. But it's weird because they're not great, they're not good. Halloween 1 is good. The rest of the Halloweens, like if you could make an argument for them not existing at all in the world being a better place, right? But Halloween 1 is good. That's not really the case here with the Friday the 13th movies, but they're just not particularly interesting. They're not epic. There's not this big mythology like in Hellraiser. There's not the psychology of modern movies. Jason's not cool like Freddy, and they're not very well directed like Poltergeist or Halloween or something. But what I kind of landed on here is, the movies know what they are, and that's good. They're not trying to be any of those other things that I just said. They're not trying to be epic or like have deep characterization. And I kind of landed on like, that's okay, because like you need that ground floor. You need that basement apartment in order to really appreciate the like penthouse view of The Ring 30 years later or something like that. Like you need the generic products in the store. You need the bag that just says chips in order to really appreciate the like Ruffles with like flavors or whatever. You need the disposable razor that doesn't actually work when you try to shave in order to spend $30 on like a 6-blade sort of thing. And that is
Richard coming in just absolutely taking a shit on the whole Friday the 13th franchise. But even before we start talking about it, I love it. No, it's but what we're not going to do is start talking shit about the Halloween franchise, because I know it's shit, but this is not the time or place to be talking bad about the Halloween franchise.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
So yeah, so Jason X, so you kind of stayed away from it just because of what it's how it had been portrayed,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like the law of diminishing returns, you know. And also, like Friday the 13th is a complete rip off of Halloween anyway. So,
Yeah.
but so did you? I'll just ask you this question now. Did you? What is this a movie that you would enjoy or you would watch again?
I mean, under the right circumstances, I think I think all the Friday the 13th movies, you enjoy them when you know what they are and what they're trying to do, and you're not trying to make them be something they're not. You're not trying to make them be more clever than they want to be. You're
Yeah,
not trying to make them more like, I don't know, like it's not Candyman, right? It's not The Grudge, it's not Scream. Like, they know what they want to do, they have a very tight lane, and they just, for like 10 years or so, they did it every year for like, or 6 or 7 years, and then they start taking some breaks, and they just do it. So if we were maybe going to watch it with like a group, or it was part of some like theme festival of like horror sci-fi stuff, I'd
yeah.
watch it something like in a situation like that, but not in a like, I'm bored on a Sunday afternoon, let me put on Jason 10 and
Yeah,
experience that again.
I see that. See, for me, this is probably my fourth or fifth time watching it, probably the third time within the last couple years. And each successive time that I've watched it, I've enjoyed it more.
Nice.
That's not to say that I am like one of my favorite movies. It started off very low. So enjoying it more and more isn't saying all that much, but
Sure.
it's better than saying I hated it or I enjoyed it less every single time.
Yeah.
Um, so all right, so let's get started talking about Jason X from 2001. This movie was written by Todd Farmer and directed by James Isaac. So Todd Farmer actually played a character in the movie. He was Private Dallas. So and then obviously Jason was played by the legend Kane Hodder. Kane actually played Jason in 3 of the movies. I think this was the last one he did. He did Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. He did the Jason Goes to Hell, and then he did Jason X. Um, and then he's gone on to do tons of other stuff, like still as a stuntman.
Mhm.
So also starring Lexa Doig, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, as Rowan LaFontaine, Lisa Ryder as KM14, Chuck Campbell as Sunaran Payton. We got to talk about these names
Yeah.
that they gave because it's supposed to
They're
be taking
future
place in the
names.
future. Yeah. The one that pisses me off the most, Melissa Aid, is Janessa Zachary. That may be somebody's real name right now, but Janessa just does something. It just angers me for some reason. We have Peter Mensa as Sergeant Elijah Brodsky, who was the coolest character
Yeah.
in this movie. Melody Johnson as Kinsa, Derwin Jordan as Waylander. We have Jordan Potts as Professor Brandon Lowe, Philip Williams as Crutch, Christy Angus as Adrian Thomas, and that character is funny. That character was named after the final girl in the original movie. Her
Yeah.
real name was Adrian, so they named her
Adrian King.
Adrian King. Yeah, and then David Cronenberg
David Cronenberg.
as Dr. Aloysius Wimmer, which is always I always forget that he's in the movie.
I didn't know when I was watching it for the first time. I was like, I started off really excited when I saw Cronenberg show up. I
Yeah.
hadn't done the deep dive into Wikipedia and stuff yet until after I watched the movie. Did you look up, do you know the story about how he ended up in the
Tell me, I'd love to hear.
in the movie? So the director, James Isaac, it goes by Jim Isaac, was like his friend and did the special effects for some Cronenberg movies. Like he worked on special effects for The Fly and Naked Lunch and Existenz. And
Nice.
like Isaac, the director, Isaac's thing, it kind of looked to Cronenberg as like a mentor. like he would shadow him on set and ask about direction and like, how does this work and why'd you do this way and stuff like that. And so Jim Isaac like goes to Cronenberg and is like, can I use some of your special effects crew to make Jason X? And Cronenberg says, yes, absolutely, but only if I can be in it. And evidently Isaacs and the producers and everybody was like, what, why does David, they were excited, but in that like, why would David Cronenberg want to be in this movie kind of thing, evidently.
Yeah.
But of course you say yes. So when David Cronenberg asks to be in your movie, you say yes, no matter what the movie is. And he evidently rewrote all of his dialogue. And it's some of the best dialogue on there. There's one particular line, because Jason's frozen at the beginning. He's not frozen. He's alive. He's chained up. They're about to freeze him because they don't know what else to do with him because he keeps coming back to life and killing everybody. And so they're going to freeze him. But Cronenberg's evil, I guess, scientist, doctor, character, whatever, doesn't want to freeze him, wants to like take him away to study him. And Cronenberg has this line, I don't want him frozen. I want him soft. Which is a very Cronenbergian line.
Yeah.
And he is clearly having a blast in the movie. He's in it for like 4 minutes and gets like a spear through the chest pretty quick. And was actually one of the highlights of the movie for me, for sure.
Yeah, it's always great to see. There were some great kills in this movie. That's one of those things like late 80s, or I would just say like horror franchises, especially slasher horror franchises. I think a lot of time what people go for are the kills. And that's why like the story doesn't really matter a lot for people. For people like you and I, we dig the story a lot more. There's just different sides of the coin for people, but in this particular movie, there's some great kills in there. And Cronenberg's death was kind of cool. Okay, great. So in 2008, Jason Voorhees is captured by the US government and is being held at the Crystal Lake Research Facility, which I love that Crystal Lake has its own research facility. It kind of reminds me of this movie it's like the zombie black exploitation movie from the 70s called Sugar Hill. And if you've ever seen it, or if you haven't, whatever, it's a zombie movie, and they flash to outside of a building and it says zombie research facility. We're like, oh, okay, there's a whole zombie research facility. Yeah. It's absolutely ridiculous and amazing at the same time. And that's kind of the feeling I get here with the Crystal Lake Research Facility. Yeah, like Jason is famous, like in the first four movies, hardly anybody knows his name. Nobody even really knows he's out there killing people somehow. But by the time we get around to this one, he's got his own like science facility. One of the like people in the 25th century later on is like, they like recognize his name and like immediately like know all about him. There's records of Crystal Lake and all that sort of stuff, it's funny because it's like Jason. I mean, like you don't even see the hockey mask until the fourth movie, and yet somehow it's one of the most iconic props in movie history. Right? Yeah. So just like in the movie. So later, Roland LaFontaine, a government scientist, decides to place Jason in cryogenic suspension after several unsuccessful attempts to kill him. While Private Samuel Johnson places a blanket on Jason, who's hanging in chains, Dr. Aloysius Bartholomew Wimmer and Sergeant Marcus and a few other red shirts, as they describe them in Star Trek, hope to conduct further research into Jason's rapid cellular regeneration and instead try to take Jason. So Jason's all tied up. And did you ever read comic books like younger? Yeah. You could still read comic books. Did you ever read The Death of Superman? It's been back in the day. Yeah, with Doomsday. Do you remember when we first see Doomsday? He's tied up to this meteoroid or asteroid, I don't remember the exact term, but he's tied up to this rock in space, all in chains, stuff like that. And this is exactly what the visual that I'm getting with Jason tied up, and he's still alive though. That's the thing. He's like looking at this army, this grunt. He's looking at this grunt, and the grunt's like so uncomfortable that he puts the some random blanket, which I would as well. But also he had to get really super close for it.
Yeah.
So I don't think I would have.
It's definitely like in those first like whatever 90 seconds after the credits, the movie establishes exactly like the rules, which is yes, Jason is this famous. Yes, we keep trying to study him because it's you try, no more pretending that this is some like just kid, no more pretending it's a person. And then yeah, he's all tied up and he's under that blanket or whatever. And then all of a sudden he's just like not anymore. Like you don't see, there's scenes in the other movies where he like pulls a knife out or he gets hung and he like climbs up the noose. This movie isn't even trying to pretend that they're going to explain how he can get out of things anymore.
Yeah.
It's just like, how does he escape? Because he's fucking Jason. That's how he escaped.
Well, he's a magician.
Yeah,
is what
yeah,
he is.
exactly. He's magic. He really is full on magic at this point.
Yeah, because Dr. Wimmer, they come into the room. He's like in this kind of huge room. It's completely empty. They pull off the blanket. It's supposed to be Jason, but they find the dead soldier instead. Jason's broken free of his restraints, and he goes ahead and slaughters the whole team of soldiers. And Dr. Wimmer takes his opportunity to run away, but of course, Jason is Jason, and he throws his I was gonna say his machete, but it's a pole, right? It's like a spear. I don't know where he gets the spear.
Maybe one of the things he was like hanging on or something. It's kind of gets like a javelin toss happening.
Exactly, right through Dr. Wimmer's torso, and goodbye to Dr. Wimmer.
David Cronenberg,
right? So Rowan then spots Marcus through the door. Before dying, he tells her to run. So Rowan successfully lures Jason into a cryonic pod and activates it. But she couldn't help but like tease him and stands right in front of the window looking at him. And Jason just like, it's made of tinfoil or something, right? And he jabs his machete into her and essentially kills her. But because the cryogenic liquid is escaping from that pod, the whole room goes on lockdown and freezes her as well.
And then so they both get frozen. There is like a huge tradition in these Friday the 13th movies of people like coming right up to the wall where Jason is and being like, well, I'm fine as long as I just lean up against this like bathroom like stall something just for him to come through it.
Yeah, this plot point for me was, I mean, obviously we know we're going to space, but I didn't know how they were going to do it. So the first time I watched it, obviously, so I kind of like this. It reminded me of Demolition Man. Have you ever seen Demolition Man?
Sure.
Yeah, it's like that freezing thing. I felt like cryogenics was a huge thing in the 90s and early 2000s. Like we heard about that urban myth of what Walt Disney's head is cryogenically frozen and stuff like that. With I was gonna say Terminator, but that doesn't happen in Terminator, does it? He gets transported to the future. But anyway, I love this part. So then in the year 2455, Earth has become too polluted to support life, and humanity has moved to a new planet called Earth 2, which is located about 20 light years into the next solar system. 3 students, Sunaran, Janessa, and Azrael, are on a field trip to the ruins of Earth 1, led by Professor Brandon Lowe, who is accompanied by an android, KM-14. They enter the Crystal Lake facility and find the still frozen Jason and Rowan, whom they bring to their spaceship, the Grendel. So when they first see Jason, they first see the cryogenic pod, and their immediate thing is, should we open it? And they just open it.
Yeah, like, because they're good scientists.
Well, it's like if you're on it's kind of like an archaeological dig, but it's kind of reminding me, now that we're speaking about it, like those mummy movies where they go into a pyramid and they find the mummy's tomb and they open up the sarcophagus right away. It's like, I think you should like prepare this be careful with the specimen better, right? Because you don't know, it could deteriorate immediately.
Right. Yeah. Do some groundwork here.
But they don't give a fuck. They just open it immediately.
It's also very like Aliens. The whole movie is definitely trying to reference Aliens. Pretty pretty much just constantly. And that's part of it as well.
Yeah, 100%. That's what the writer has said, that at first he wanted to do Alien and Aliens, but they didn't have the budget for that, so he kind of had to condense it. But yeah, you 100%, you're correct. They were definitely referencing that. And then there's kind of some jokes about like, what is he wearing? They're like, oh, it's some sort of filtration unit.
The hockey mask, yeah,
And they're like, no, it's a sport that was outlawed in like
2024.
2024. It's like next
Still
year, hopefully. Yeah, it's gonna be outlawed. So I thought that was kind of like, some of the humor,
yeah,
is a bit outdated, but it's really not bad for 2001. Like I from what I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, there's nothing really too like cringy or like problematic that I can recall in the humor, which you see a lot of like cringy and problematic humor in like 80s and 90s and even
sure.
up until 2000s horror movies. And I don't think you see it. There's definitely cringy as far as like being maybe embarrassing, but not like problematic in it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole, especially for the first few movies, I want to watch Friday the 13th 1, 2, and 3 and be like, oh, this is actually a comment on misogyny, because all these teenage boys are such assholes to the girls that then they all get killed, and it's actually a comment. It's like, can we make this a feminist movie? And you can't. It just falls apart. I think they just thought it would. Those characters are like funny and charming, and they're kind of just creepy teenage boy misogyny. It's definitely dialed back somewhat in Jason X, but I think there's kind of a little bit of a Starship Troopers vibe as well, with all the like, everyone's very young and fit, and all the like outfits are kind of like missing key pieces of fabric.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of that in there too.
Yeah. And I actually did Friday the 13th part 1 earlier in the show history. We did that with friend of the show, Zach Chapman. So we go kind of deep into the history of the franchise in that one. So if you're interested in learning more about that one, take a listen to that episode.
Yeah,
but there was the one scene that we'll get to later on where they have a simulation of the Camp Crystal Lake, and they have the two buxom young co-eds, and they get naked and sort of stuff. So we'll talk about that when we get there. But so also there's a part where one of the characters, might have been Azrael, kind of bumps into Jason, and
when Jason's still frozen.
Yeah, even when he's frozen, he's still killing people. He manages to slice off the character's arm, and what is like KM14 like puts like a metagel on it, just seals at the skin, which is like a cool effect. And then it eventually, we'll find out later, they're able to use their nanotechnology to kind of regrow Oboy's arm, which is it's a cool concept,
Yeah, those were pretty decent effects and a cool concept as well. That felt like a little bit, that felt clever. That was probably a pretty clever use of nanobots in 2001.
Yeah. So they take Jason and Rowan to their spaceship, which is called the Grendel. Also on the ship are Lowe's remaining students, Kinsa, Waylander, and Stoney. Once there, they reanimate Rowan while Jason is pronounced dead and left in the morgue. Lowe's intern, Adrienne, is ordered to dissect Jason's body. Then Lowe, who is in serious debt, calls his financial backer, Dieter Perez of the Solaris, who notes that Jason's body could be worth a substantial amount to a collector.
This is the guy who knows all about Jason, can like drop his murder stats. Just
yeah. And then and then of course we have to have the sex scene, two sex scenes, I think, happening simultaneously.
There is that creepy student professor.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
supposed to be kind of funny because there are forceps and the professors in a negligee have all like at the same time. Still, it's getting into some weird territory, but it's also kind of funny because there are forceps and the dude's wearing a negligee, and it's kind of, it feels like a very that whole scene. I couldn't help but wonder, like, what was that writing room like when when these people are reading or writing the screenplay? Does one turn to the other and say, I got it,
nipple
What if the
clamps.
professor's into into forceps or clamps or whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sure, let's do it.
And he's got to be wearing a nightie or negligee or whatever.
Something, yeah, like
Yeah.
purple lacy sort of thing.
Yeah. And then he like yells the moment of climax, "You pass," or something like that. I was like, okay, all right, whatever. They're sex positive.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
So, and then also Stoney is having sex with Kinsa, and of course, Jason icicle over there, he is now defrosted completely and wakes up. They make it seem like he can sense that teenagers or young people are having sex
Yeah.
because he like just opens his eyes and just sits up. He does a Michael Myers at the end of Halloween where he just sits up with his torso and all that.
Mhm.
So I don't that
Yeah,
was also
he's
kind of weird.
summoned back. He's warmed up by the.
Yeah, yeah. And so he's back to life and he kills Adrienne by the most iconic death in this movie and one of the more iconic death scenes in horror movie history, I believe. It's where he grabs her by the neck and sticks her head in a sink filled with liquid nitrogen and then smashes it against the countertop,
Yeah.
and her whole face just becomes obliterated. And then you can see some of like the reds. It looks absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that's probably my favorite. I think one of the more interesting ones in here for sure.
Yeah, I do want to know why they have just a tub filled with liquid nitrogen just out there. That's dangerous shit.
It's, in retrospect, yeah, probably a health and safety violation.
Yeah, because they're on a ship, man. Like just like when you're on your ship in on the sea or in water, like I would imagine it would move. It's not safe. It's not safe.
Turbulence.
Yeah, or something, So, but regardless, it's an amazing kill. I absolutely love it. And I know that MythBusters, I believe MythBusters try to recreate it. Obviously, not with a human specimen, but they debunked it, saying that it wasn't possible. But who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
It's just an amazing shot. Jason then takes a machete shaped. Yeah, he walks up to all these surgical tools. I love this. They even have it like they do this in Halloween as well. Like they have this surgical style machete. Like in what maybe I'm wrong. Please forgive me if I am, and let me know. In what instance will a doctor or a surgeon require a fucking machete? It's so ridiculous.
Bone saw that's 4 feet long, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a lot of mortuaries have offered Jason some handy tools here.
I feel like the prop department feels that if they make it stainless steel and like completely shiny, that we're gonna be like, oh yeah, that's completely plausible.
It's medical. It's a medical device.
So that he kills Stoney. So Jason kills Stoney by impaling him with the machete and then drags him away to Kinsa's horror. So Kinsa, so Stoney opens the door and Jason just impales him with that machete, and all the blood goes onto Kinsa.
Uh-huh. They're the couple that were just having sex. Their sex is the one that resuscitated him.
Yeah, and I believe what I read was that the actress who plays Kinsa was not expecting that blood to be splattered on her, and some of it got in her eye. So when she's yelling at the surprise of the blood and the pain in her eyes.
Great.
So then we see Sergeant Brodsky. He finds out that Jason is on the ship and has been reanimated, and he gets the group of grunts together to kind of to get Jason. And I believe this is where what's the professor's name? Professor Lowe. This is where Professor Lowe asks Brodsky to like keep him alive, like
classic evil smug professor sort of character, right?
Yeah,
it's a horror and sci-fi classic.
He offers him like $500,000 or $500,000 or whatever they use in the future for it, And then when Brodsky goes back to his grunts, he's like, the professor wants him alive. And they're like, well, what does that mean? He's like, well, that means is you kill him, but after you kill him, shoot him in the leg, so it makes it look like we tried to take him, which I love.
And that's how you know that sergeant's going to be like one of the good guys,
Right.
that
He can't be bought.
He can't be bought by the slimy professor.
Yeah. So meanwhile, Jason attacks. So at this point in the movie, it's just your kind of standard slasher fare. That's why you have a big cast, because you got to kill a lot of people.
I love that you're saying all the character names as if even the actors knew their character names, because I certainly didn't.
Yeah. Try to be respectful. They're doing their work, you know. So meanwhile, Jason attacks Dallas and Azrael, who were playing a game at that point. They're doing like a simulation. Yeah, a simulation, which is the CGI did not age very well. It looks PBS level.
It's been worse.
Like, yeah. But it looks PBS level, like after school, like TV show for like young adults or something like that.
Yeah,
it's
that's a good way to put it.
But they so they're playing a game where they're like going against dinosaurs or something like that.
Yeah,
and they slash one of them, and then Jason walks in and he kills them, and they're one of the guys is like, that doesn't count as a kill, and he's completely like cut in half.
Yeah, the one who already had their arm grow back is all.
Yeah,
I thought that was a cool, interesting moment. Like, you kind of figure out pretty quickly that monster they're hunting isn't actually there. It's like, this isn't a Jason versus a monster movie.
Yeah.
But it was funny. I thought it was one of the more funny moments. The other dude gets his head chopped off and the head's still like talking.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, end the simulation. They end the simulation, but Jason's still walking towards them. It's like, what the hell's happening? And then he proceeds to kill him.
Yeah.
He kills Azrael by like breaking his back, and then later Dallas is killed after having his face smashed against the wall. One thing I wanted to say, this simulation room reminds me of, if you've ever seen the 90s X-Men cartoon series, that simulation room that they have in there.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Sure.
I'm noticing a lot of like 90s comic book references when I'm watching this movie, and I didn't really have that, or actually when I was talking about this movie, I didn't really have that while I was watching it, but now talking about it, I don't know why, but I feel like I'm in that era, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. And you know what? I don't know that I can point to specific frames, but have you ever read like the Aliens comics from the 80s and into the 90s?
Was it Dark Horse?
I think Dark Horse.
Yeah, I read some of them. I can't say I read them all, but yeah, I read
There's
some of them. Yeah,
tons of them. Like I got into some of those a few years ago, just not really knowing. I mean, I guess I could have told you there were alien comics out there, but not knowing that there's just volumes and volumes, and a lot of the same characters from Ripley, and some of the same universe, certainly, as like especially the James Cameron movie, and just tons of cool space stuff. And I have a feeling those were definitely read by these filmmakers as well.
it's funny you should mention the comic movie tie-ins, because Jason X had 2 comic book tie-ins that were basically direct sequels to this movie. And so if you or anybody listening is like just wanting more and more of this Jason X universe, you should check those out, because it adds to the story a lot. And at one point, I believe in the second comic, Jason and Jason X meets and fight.
Yeah.
So 2 versions of the same character fight. And it's like Jason, like the classic 80s, 90s Jason that everybody knows, and then Uber Jason go head to head.
The Jason we get at the end here.
Yeah, which is frustrating. I had the same issue that I had with another classic horror movie where the titular character isn't shown until the very end. Kind of like with this Jason X, we don't see. I wrote it down. I think we're definitely in the last act. We're like 3/4 of the way through the movie before we even. I think we're like at the hour 18 mark, and the movie's like an hour and a half. So it might be like hour 12, hour 13 mark, but like the movie's only an hour and a half where we finally see Jason X.
Yeah, who's on the cover?
Jason.
You know, like the metal mask is like on the poster.
Yeah, so it's not like, I think maybe they were going for a surprise there, but the advertising department didn't get the memo, because that's all that they advertise it for. You know, that's one of the more frustrating things about it.
the whole franchise does just weird stuff with the actual body of Jason, where like he's not in the first one, and then in the second and third one he's more or less just a dude. But then, so this is when my like rewatching or watching so many is coming in handy. In the fourth one, he's in the morgue and he wakes up in the morgue and is just alive again. But then in the fifth one, he's dead and buried, and then gets struck by lightning and comes back. And at some point, he starts like passing his heart and putting it in other people, and like they become Jason. And like they were gonna make Corey Feldman's character the killer for a while, and then like he was just gonna be like a new killer, but it wasn't gonna be Jason anymore, and they scrapped those plans. And then it's like Jason blood can get in you, and then like you become Jason. And they what the actual like body is, the body, to bring in another Halloween reference, like the rules keep changing until I think they just decide whatever, it's Jason, it can be whatever we want it to be. Nobody's actually like checking our receipts.
Oh yeah, the premise of Jason already doesn't make sense.
Sure.
He died as a child in part one. I'm sorry, spoiler alert. I mean, if you're listening to Jason X and you haven't seen Jason, I'm sorry. But he dies as a child in part one. Part two comes back as a full-grown man.
5 years later. For some reason, part two is set 5 years after the first one. They make the point of saying that 5 years ago, all these, and I guess it was like, why would it just came out a year later? The movie did, but I think they do the 5 years thing to like, because Jason grew in those 5 years from when you see him at the end of part one to part two.
And then at one point, I think in Jason Goes to Hell, no, Jason Takes Manhattan, he's a baby at the end. I'm sorry.
The heart, that's when he's passing his heart around in that one.
Yeah. Okay, I'll put a spoiler alert at the beginning of this episode because we're just like spoiling the whole franchise, which is fine by me. But
I think you don't get to part 10 without having watched. That's probably also part of the reason why I didn't see part 10. I was like, I haven't seen like 7 of these movies. Why would I start at part 10?
So like the whole premise, and then in the movie before this one, Jason Goes to Hell, he's literally dragged down to hell by Freddy. So just trying to make sense of the Jason character as a whole is more like you just can't. Can't. So then back to Jason killing these motherfuckers. He then tries to attack Crutch, who is like he's an engineer. He says he's an engineer. But Brodsky and his soldiers save him by gunning Jason down. And Jason disappears. And then Brodsky and the team kind of split up. And then Jason, of course, kills them one by one. Sure. One is killed by having his neck broken very slowly. Typically, we'll see like a quick neck snap, but this one, it was like a really slow one. And I think that was a choice by Kane Hodder. He wanted to make it more kind of excruciating, so he did that. Oh. Condor is impaled on a drill. This is so stupid. Earlier in the movie, we see like this. It is a drill that's just exposed, open air to anybody. And then this particular character, Condor, is just impaled on the drill, which, yes, it's a cool kill, but it's so stupid at the same time. But you can't be angry at it. I mean, he just like falls on it and then turns.
He turns. That's right. That's the best part. This is what we were saying, right? The movie doesn't try to explain anything. Like, it knows what it is. But also, it's like a ship. It's like a study abroad ship or something. Is that what it is? There's a professor and
but there's also like
students.
Just truck, because they were going for that alien vibe, so they're kind of like space truckers as well. And then there's an army unit. So I don't know.
Here's your study abroad, and here are your 12 Marines to go with the 6 students. I don't know, I guess it's a dangerous universe out there in the 25th century. There's no Starfleet to keep everybody in line.
And here's this drill. Just in case you get to a planet you want to like drill into, go ahead and use that drill.
Yeah. And they're like, I guess, stealing stuff from Earth. One of the like black market dealers talks about DVDs, and nobody wants to buy DVDs anymore.
Okay.
They're kind of like pirates, or at least the professor seems to be a little shady.
Yeah. So one of them is murdered after Jason slits her throats. I believe that's Gecko. And then Jason attacks another character, Kicker, but he
This is a
shoots him.
pilot, right?
Yeah, causing him to back up and get impaled on a grapple. While Kicker tells Brodsky, Jason unhooks himself and splits Kicker in half, killing him. And Brodsky tries looking for his soldiers, but comes across the dead body of Briggs impaled on the hook. And then Brodsky is then impaled by 2 spikes to the wall, injuring him. So then Professor
There's a great line there where he's like, the one hook comes through. This is like the badass sergeant. And that actor's kind of had like a career. I was like scouting their IMDb's. He's probably the most successful one out of it. But one hook comes through his guts and he's like, it's going to take more than a poke in the ribs to get rid of me. And then another one comes through and he goes, that ought to do it. And then he seemingly dies.
Yeah, that was great. That's right. Then Professor Lowe orders Pilot Lou to dock on the Solaris. As he's talking to the Solaris engineer, he's killed by Jason. I believe, what is it? Jason shows him the head. Is this the part where Jason shows him a decapitated head?
Yeah, the co-pilot or whatever has to go back and do something. And then
Yeah. And he shows him the decapitated head, and Lou looks at it. He's like, well, what the fuck? And then Jason kills him. And of course, with no pilot, the ship stays on course and crashes through the nearby space station, Solaris, destroying it, and killing Dieter Perez and everyone else on the Solaris.
Like,
so
thousands, probably. There's like high-rise buildings on this spaceship.
Yeah, this has to be like the greatest kill count ever, because the director, or I believe the director or the writer, I'm forgetting now, did say that there were upwards of 20,000 people on the Solaris. So that has to be the greatest kill count ever, So the crash also damages one of the Grendel's pontoon sections, and Jason breaks into the lab, so he crashes into the Grendel's pontoon sections, and they're trying to figure out what to do, and they call out to they have a distress beacon, and somebody hears their distress beacon, and they're like, yeah, we're about 45 minutes away, and then we only have like half an hour to live. But before it kind of explodes or whatever, but then they decide that they can get to another section, or they can survive if they can separate this part of the ship that's kind of failing. And so that's what they're trying to do. But in the meantime, Jason kind of breaks, everybody leaves except Professor Lowe, and Jason breaks into the lab, and he reclaims his machete, and Professor Lowe is like, it's okay, guys, it's okay, he just wanted his machete.
He turns his back on Jason just to like go back to his like students.
Yeah,
good idea.
Poor decision making on the part of Professor Lowe. He's already having sex with a student, which is another poor decision making. He's being blackmailed, or he's trying to sell the body of Jason. Another poor decision making. Like, this guy was not very smart, despite being a professor.
Yeah, I mean, it's implied that he's going to sell like the Rowan's character, that he's going to sell the rejuvenated woman from the 21st century also.
Yeah, exactly. So he gets what's coming to him, and he gets decapitated. With the ship badly damaged, the remaining survivors head for Grendel's shuttle, while Sunarin heads elsewhere with KM-14. After finding Lou's remains, Crutch and Waylander prepare the shuttle. Rowan finds Brodsky, but he's too heavy for her to carry, so she leaves to get help. Waylander leaves to help him, while Crutch prepares the shuttle himself.
So in the let's talk about this moment when because the shuttle is where like those 2 guys have been killed already, and these 2 other pilots, I guess, is kind of the chain of operations, and the ship is a little bit unclear to me. But then 2 more pilots show up. And all that's left of the one dude who had been the pilot previously is just like these like strips of like flesh and viscera. Like you can't even identify any bones or features, but you just know it used to be a person. And the pilot looks at it and says, "Of course, I've seen worse." And there's no, he later says to the other pilot who's kind of freaking out because there's like whatever tissue everywhere. This one pilot says, "You weren't alive during the Microsoft conflict. We were beating each other with our own severed limbs." That's the comic book that I want. I want the prequel. That isn't even about Jason. I want to know about this Microsoft conflict.
Well, you wanted commentary on society, and there you go, Richard. It's right there.
I guess who was Microsoft in conflict with in 2000? Is this, I guess, Apple still?
Apple, yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
There's also another line by one of the pilots earlier in the movie when they find out that Rowan that she's still alive and they're bringing her on the ship. They're like, a female is being brought on the ship, and the guy's like, "Oh, female, wow."
Yeah, those are creepy. Yeah,
and then he's like, he kind of goes into saying, "Oh, whatever," and at the end he's like, "I'm so lonely." I was like, I like that. That was a bit self-aware. Okay, so Waylander leaves to help get Brodsky, and Crutch prepares the shuttle himself. There's also actually another part at this same scene where Crutch asks Waylander for his vest, and Waylander gives it to him thinking it's something really important, like to do with piloting the ship, but all he really needed was to wipe off like an earpiece. And he's like, "Fucking asshole," sort of things. So all that to say, like, I like some of the humor in the movie. I think it keeps it going. And that's one of the things, it's for me, on the fourth or fifth watch of this movie now, it's charming. It's a bit, it's charming to see that they know what they're doing, right?
Yeah. Then not that
they know what they're doing, but they're self-aware.
And they're having fun doing it. And I'm sure their filming probably took like 4 weeks or something. There's in and out, and I'm sure they all had a good time.
Yeah, well, it was filmed, I think it finished in 2000, but it wasn't released in the States until 2002.
Yeah, I was confused about that because it was released in Spain in November 2001, but not here until April 2002. So something happened there.
Yeah, I think with
distribution or something.
Yeah, with New Line, they had a lot of like failures around that time, and so like they were weary and then of releasing it. And I believe the president or the executive that signed on or gave the green light for this movie was kind of let go, and this was kind of his project, and so they didn't release it. They weren't going to be releasing it until finally they did. But it's also, this movie was made because Jason versus Freddy was in limbo. Right. And so the producer, Sean Cunningham, didn't want the property to go stale. So they're like, let's do something. But they're like, well, we can't, how are we going to mess with the timeline? So they're like, well, let's just throw it way, way the fuck in the future.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that that's always the best reason to make a movie, is because you don't want the IP to go stale, and also you're waiting for another movie to get.
You're in like a Fantastic Four situation or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the backstory of why the movie was made. But
I kind of wonder if the spaceship or the spaceship destroying the space station and the high rises on the space station, I wonder if some people were like, that's too 9/11-y, right? And like, because if it's supposed to come out in the fall of 2001, like it takes another good 10 years before Hollywood starts like working us through our 9/11 trauma with superhero movies and watching buildings get destroyed again.
Yeah.
Like it takes a while. People aren't ready for that. War of the Worlds by Spielberg is probably the first time it feels like Hollywood's like inching into that territory again. So I wonder if that maybe.
Yeah, good point. That's a good point. Yeah. So on board the shuttle, Kinsa has a panic attack and locks everybody out, and they're like begging for her to get in. And at one point, Rowan like grabs the earpiece and like is talking to Kinsa. It's like, "Kinsa, sweetie, it's Rowan." It's like, you just met her 2 or 3 hours ago. She's not your best friend. You're not like co-workers. I don't know why you're
5 centuries apart from each other.
Yeah, you're not one of her like dearest friends or anything. It was just really weird. But she tries to talk her into opening the gates or the doors for them, but she doesn't. She ends up trying to detach the shuttle, but they were still fueling it at the time, and so the fuel line was still attached to the shuttle, and she tries to pilot the shuttle away, but it crashes into the ship's hull and explodes, and killing her.
Yeah. At this point, Rowan is also very Ripley. She's tough. She's got a big kind of sci-fi gun that she's
Yeah.
knows how to use. They're really trying to toughen her up here.
Yeah, she picks up a gun, and one of the, I think, I forget which character says it. He's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Do you even know how to use that thing?" And she's like, "If you use the one, you use them all." I'm like, "Okay, that's fine. That's all the explanation we need."
Yeah.
Suddenly, Sergeant Brodsky attacks Jason, but is easily overpowered. Sunarin reappears with an upgraded KM-14, complete with an array of weapons and new combat skills. Kate Beckinsale owes her whole career to KM-14, right? Because this is like the Underworld series right here. The leather outfit, the martial arts, the guns, all that sort of stuff. This felt underground to me, but it was really badass. I loved it.
And the Matrix.
And the Matrix, right.
Matrix 2 years earlier.
That is true. I had completely forgot about the Matrix. Yeah. But this is
yeah, cool, for sure. It definitely feels like a cool moment. And I don't think that actress, like, she doesn't have an IMDb like thing. It didn't seem like she really had much of a career.
Really? Okay. That's too bad, because she was one of the highlights of the movie for me. I think she was pretty cool.
Oh, wait a minute. She doesn't have an IMDb. She doesn't have I couldn't find her on Wikipedia.
Oh, I gotcha.
All these actors are also Canadian. Like, they must have filmed this in.
Yeah, they filmed it in Canada to take the tax credit, and it was cheaper to do that than like flying American characters over. American actors over, I should say. So KM-14 fights Jason off, and just badass, just like shooting him, weapons and all that. She even does
cool
the whole
flips and things.
She even does the whole like shooting around him, like on the wall, so she can kick him through it, that sort of thing. Like, very cool. I really
and
enjoyed
Jason's
that.
like, you can tell Jason is like impressed. You can tell he's sort of like, he's not upset really that this is happening. I think he's kind of like into it, to be honest.
And then she finally pulls out the BMF, the big motherfucker, and kind of like shoots chunks of himself, chunks of him off, like the leg and a side, like a side of his body, and finally the head, which is a great effect. I thought the effect was great.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's just destroyed. There's no question about it.
Yeah. And so seemingly Jason is dead, right? Because he's blasted off the right arm, left leg, his rib cage, and then his head. So he's got to be dead, right? Of course. Yeah. So then this is where the survivors send out the distress call and receive that reply from a nearby patrol shuttle. So nearly an hour passes as the survivors begin setting explosive charges to separate the remaining pontoon from the main drive. As they work, Jason is brought back to life by the damaged medical station. So he landed on the medical station with the nano ants or whatever, right? The nanobots sort of thing. And it's damaged. And so of course it sends out the ants, and they just start reviving
their job.
Jason. Yeah.
I hate it when technology tries to be helpful when you don't want it to be. Like, don't you like in your life, don't you like when Maps tries to send you a different route than the one you want to take, or when your Bluetooth is connecting to things, it's like, or your screen is changing, it's like darkness. It's like, I didn't ask you to be helpful. Don't be helpful right now. Same thing. It's still a problem in the year 2455, evidently.
I think it's hilarious to mention that. Yeah, because it's like when you ask Alexa something, and she gives you a complete wrong answer, or she just keeps going. Like, you just want to know the time, and then she goes into the weather and the forecast. Is like, Alexa, shut up, stop it. Not an advertisement for Alexa. We've had Alexa for a very long time. My wife loves it, and I cannot get rid of it. So since much of his biological tissue was destroyed, he is rebuilt as an even more powerful cyborg. So the parts of him that were missing biomass, they replaced with metal, right? So he's a cyborg.
Yeah. He's got like armor. You can't tell if it's his body is the armor or if the nanobots also made him armor.
Right. This does not look
Oh,
the best. It really looks like
you mean him like the Uber Jason, like the costume and everything? Is that what you mean by
yeah, yeah, because it just looks like Kane Hodder is in a black leotard, and in some of the parts of the leotard are covered with metallic sections of armor, but the actual CGI of the nanobots, the nano ants, whatever doing it, again, looks like PBS after school sort of thing. um hasn't aged the best. What did you think? What do you think of Uber Jason's look?
I mean, it doesn't look like Jason. I mean, like if this character appeared in, I don't know, some other sci-fi, like some movie John Carpenter wished he had never made in like 2002 or something. If this character dressed like this appeared in that movie, you wouldn't think, oh, it's Jason. Like, and that's, it's intimidating, right? And it's supposed to be weird and kind of strange looking, but yeah, it doesn't. It's sort of just kind of like generically evil killer, which is the risk you take when messing with like the classic look. It's not really Jason anymore. And I just noticed this too, he's got the shiny surgical saw back. He doesn't have his machete, which he made a point of reclaiming.
Yeah,
He's
well,
got the
he's
shiny
upgraded
one
now.
back.
And that was the other thing when KM14 was reintroduced as like the updated one. Sonaran jumps in scene and he's like, I gave her an upload. Like an upload? I think maybe you mean upgrade or something. I don't know. It feels like that 90s or 2000s like computer jargon where they say, oh, he's hacking into the mainframe sort of thing, where
Back
people
to that,
just put
the
things in there.
Matrix.
Yeah.
The tagline of the movie is "Evil gets an upgrade."
Okay. All right. Well, I guess they had to go for that then. Yeah, well, yeah, he doesn't say upgrade, he says an upload, right? So there,
Yeah.
yeah. So Jason then easily defeats KM14 by punching her head off. And the whole time we failed to mention the romantic subplot with KM14 and Sonaran,
Who I guess
where
built the robot,
he
I guess.
built her, the android, and she like comes on to him a bit. And everybody, whenever he's like he has to work on her, the whole crew's like, yeah, we know what you mean by that. And he's like, it's not like that. And then at the end where
Anyways,
KM14 is like giving them the odds, she's like, oh, there's like 14% chance that we'll survive. He's like, 14, you can't do anything better than that. And then I think Sonaran is the one who kisses her, and by virtue of this kiss, I guess now that their love has increased the chance of them surviving.
up to like 50, it's now like over 50%.
Yeah.
And then they keep kissing, so maybe presumably there's also like a sex scene there between the android and the dude who made the android.
Yeah. Thankfully, they cut away before.
A
Before
little
we find out.
unclear.
Yeah. So, but she's not dead. She just gets her head punched off. As Sunaran picks up her still functioning head, Jason attacks them, but is stopped by Waylander, who sacrifices himself by setting off the charges while the others escape. So Jason was in the section of the ship that they were trying to blow up to separate it so the remaining functioning part can survive. And Jason survives that, and he's blown back onto the shuttle.
Right. Yeah, he's sucked out into space, but then comes back.
Yeah. all very silly stuff. But he punches a hole through the hull, which of course creates a vacuum and starts sucking all the air out of the room. But I think it was Janessa. Janessa's the only one who's like, everybody else is kind of safe, kind of farther away from the vacuum, but Janessa is right there, and then she's holding onto the grate, and a grate pulls out and goes up against the vacuum, the hole that's been punched in, and then she gets sucked in, and she's sucked out. She actually says, "Ah, this sucks." It's like,
yeah,
oh, okay.
This sucks on so many levels.
Terrible. and it sucks her out. It pulls her through the suction, and then what we see is just like viscera, right? The
Yeah,
remaining,
she's grated.
yeah, she's been graded.
And then when you see the grate fly back, because she's holding onto the grate and it gets sucked out of her hand and over the hole, like you said, like you know that she's gonna go through there. And I was really wondering, like, are they gonna show this? Like, this is gonna be really intense special effects. But they don't. They I think they knew. I wonder if they tried it or they tried to mock up some stuff and were like, no, we can't do this.
Yeah, they probably didn't have the budget or the time to do it. So then there's a power failure with the docking door, which forces Brodsky to have to put on a spacesuit and go outside, do a spacewalk to fix it. Looks amazing. He looks so fucking cool in this spacesuit.
Mm-hmm. So spacesuits kind of reminded me of the spacesuits from 2001.
Yeah, the orange. Yeah, it looked.
Think about the shape of them too.
So meanwhile, they use a holographic simulation of Crystal Lake to distract Jason.
I like this.
Yeah. Why did they have this program?
Because Jason's famous.
So they just pulled it up. Every spaceship has the Jason simulation, Camp Crystal Lake simulation, for just in case this situation happens.
Their virtual Wikipedia. I mean, I spent too long thinking about this. I was like, because that one person, the black market antiquities dealer or whatever,
yeah,
is literally sleeping and is woken up by the professor guy, because he's trying to sell the frozen body and then the survivor. He's trying to sell Jason and Rowan, and the professor's like, and we have this other specimen named Voorhees. And the black market guy's like, Jason Voorhees? He killed something like 200 people in the 20th century. So I was like, this is 450 years later. I was like, this would be like if someone was like, hey, Miguel, I found this sarcophagus in Romania. All it says on it is Impaler. And you were like, Vlad the Impaler? All right, I'm behind now. Now you could tell ChatGPT to design Vlad the Impaler's castle for me today, and that would work. So that means the VR hologram, I told you I spent too much time thinking about this, of 2455 would absolutely know what Crystal Lake looked like.
Okay, all right. I'm not mad at it. I can appreciate it. So they used the 2455 version of ChatGPT to recreate in the simulation Crystal Lake with the busty naked co-eds to distract Jason.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is the first time, at least, I noticed the music, the kill.
Yeah.
If that appears earlier in the movie, I missed it. But it definitely appears there when he's back at Crystal Lake, and I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah, and actually the same composer for Friday the 13th did the same music for this one, or did the music for this movie as well. Manfredini, his first name is escaping me, but I always like to see when the composer comes back from the original. So they use the holographic simulation, but Jason realizes the deception, and but not before killing the two women with the what do they call, sleeping bags? A kill reminiscent of earlier in this series when they did the same thing, you know. So the door's fixed, and then Brodsky confronts Jason so the rest can escape. As they leave, the pontoon explodes, again propelling Jason at high speed toward the survivors. However, Brodsky intercepts Jason in mid-flight and maneuvers them both into the atmosphere of Earth 2, apparently killing them both. So one thing I hate that the black character has to die to save the white characters.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely hate that. That being said,
and he dies like twice also.
He dies twice, yeah. And then
if not three times.
Wayland, the other black character, also dies. But so I hate that aspect of it. However, This death is fucking epic.
Yeah.
He rides Jason down through the atmosphere, apparently he definitely burns up through the atmosphere,
Uh-huh.
like apparently killing Jason. It's a fucking epic death, an amazing way to go out. I hate that he had to be him, because he was the most like the coolest character to me in the movie. So that sucked. But so he rides him down in the atmosphere. And then Sunaran assures Cam 14 that he will build a new body for her, while Rowan breathes a sigh of relief. On the planet, two teens sit beside a forest lake, set off to find where the falling star landed, as Jason's mask sinks to the bottom of the lake.
Yeah,
The
it's
end.
like it comes full circle. Like it's funny that Jason becomes a shooting star, and they're like, "Oh, a shooting star."
So beautiful.
But the two kids sitting by the lake, they look very 80s. They're definitely classic, like just white boy, white girl by the lake, clearly about to have sex. Um, and the guy, there's always one of them. Sometimes it's a woman. Usually it's a guy. Is like, let's go check this out, or let's go over here, let's go over there, and it always leads to a huge bloodbath
Yeah.
because you never see the body, you just see the mask, and the mask is
Oh, yeah.
damaged, but it still exists.
I like to think if he survived, maybe Brodsky survived.
Sure, maybe that suit afforded some like protection.
Yeah. So that was Jason X from 2001. So Richard, I gotta ask you, what did you think of the movie?
I think I appreciated it because I'd prepped myself by watching so many of the previous ones, and I at a certain point, these Friday the 13th movies know that their best chance is to be a little funny, to make fun of themselves a little bit, and to just have a good time while doing it. Like part 4 and part 6 are pretty, are pretty good, partly because of that. And by not taking itself too seriously and having some light moments, and not trying to get bogged down in any like any level of realism like at all. As opposed to movies like the Scream movies try to be very like real, like they try to explain like why things are happening and how people are getting into these situations. By the time you get to Jason X, these filmmakers are just having fun. And yeah, I appreciated that. Would I recommend it to someone as their first or only Friday the 13th movie? No. But to people who are at least familiar with the Jason kind of like mythos, such as it is, and you kind of like a little bit sarcastic, like sci-fi horror movies, yeah, sure, yeah, it's worth a watch.
Yeah, like I said it earlier, like this, I wouldn't say this movie begs rewatches, because it doesn't. I just happened to rewatch it a couple more times. And it's not like I learned anything additional having watched the movie. However, I did get to see, a lot of the campiness. Like, this movie is not scary at all. There's one part I failed to mention it earlier, but at the very beginning of the movie with Rowan, where she was kind of leading him to the cryogenic chamber. They were going through like sections of this abandoned, or not abandoned, but of like this warehouse are very dark, and there's steam pipes, all this sort of shit. That was the most suspenseful the movie ever gets. And it wasn't very suspenseful, but it felt like shades of what we saw in the past, of like part 1 to part 2, where they were going for the horror. And I really appreciate that. That being said, never see it again in the movie.
Yeah.
So, you kind of see shades of what the franchise once was. Now we've moved on. Now it's like a comedy horror almost. So I appreciated that. I appreciate some of the humor in it, campiness. I don't know. This is, like I said, 4th or 5th time watching it. I may like it even more the next time I watch it. I would definitely, if I was to watch this, like, so do you go to Terror Tuesday at all? Are you familiar with Terror? I know you're in Austin.
At the Draft House, yeah.
At the Draft House. So they've recently played, I believe, Jason X, and I didn't go because I was like, I've seen it a bunch of times, but I should have, because watching this with 200-300 people would have been, I think, amazing. right?
Yeah.
This is the
Who
perfect
know
kind
what
of
they're
movie.
getting into, like they're excited about it.
Yeah, exactly. So I appreciate that part of it. Now, is it a great movie? No. Is it a good movie? Again, probably no. But it's a fun movie, and I appreciate that because I watched some really depressing movies, and I watched some really like psychological horror films that just like fuck you up for days, right? And this is not that. This is just a fun time. This is a popcorn movie sort of thing with and it never gets really too well, it gets a bit convoluted, but if you don't understand the storyline, you're like, well, fuck it, I'm just here to watch the kills. And it does have great kills. A lot of
Absolutely.
practical effects are done in here, so
Yeah.
I appreciate that part of it as well. So all of that being said, I did like the movie. um we'll see how much I liked it, but first I wanted to ask you, Richard, if you could rate the movie out of 5 upside down crosses, which is our rating system here, how many upside down crosses would you give Jason X?
I think I'd go with two
Okay,
upside down crosses.
okay, that's fair. For me, I find I give my ratings based on like eliminating other ratings. So, for example, it's not a one upside down cross, and it's not a 5 upside down cross, not a
Mhm.
4 upside down cross. I would probably give it 3. I think in the past I've given it 2.5 upside down crosses, but I think just I found it more charming this time around for some reason,
Mhm.
and funnier as well. So I think I'll give it, yeah, I think I'll give it 3 upside down crosses. And like I said, those, like I tell everybody, um, ratings change from day to day, from mood to mood,
Sure.
you know. And right now I'm feeling generous, so it's
Nice.
3 upside down crosses. So next, what we do, Richard, is I will suggest to you a movie, a similar movie, like in the kind of the vein of Jason X, and I would ask one of you. All right, Richard. So for you, the movie that I wanted to recommend, and actually it's a franchise if you wanted to get into it, really,
Mhm.
is Hatchet from 2006, and then there's Hatchet 2, Hatchet 3, and then Crowley. The character is called Victor Crowley, and that is Crowley is played by Kane Hodder.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and so it's a slasher one, but a kind of a series he's made his own. And I've only seen the first 2, but they were a lot of fun. So I would recommend
Okay.
Hatchet. It's basically Jason, but with a different kind of storyline. So
Yeah.
that's one I would recommend to you. What are your
Sounds cool.
recommendations for me?
I'm excited to watch Hatchet now, so because I haven't seen that. But I would recommend you, although I think you've probably seen them pretty recently, but you, an audience, to rewatch Friday the 13th Part 4, which is a new beginning. No, sorry, the final chapter, and also Part 6, Jason Lives, because I think those two are like the influence of those two are obviously felt in this one, because in Part 4 is when they first tried to kill Jason, and it feels like they really bring like a filmmaking, like the filmmaking is just better in Part 4. Like the direction is better, the acting's a bit better, the film looks like a modern movie with whether it's film stock or camera or color correction or something, but it doesn't have that almost Technicolor 70s look. It
Okay.
looks like a more modern movie. That 70s look is great, but Part 4 feels like a real movie. Crispin Glover's in it, Corey Feldman's in it, and they kill Jason, and
Crispin
that's interesting.
Crispin
And
Glover's
then
dancing is in it.
the Crispin Glover's dancing is in it. And then Part 6, because of course they didn't even leave Jason dead for like a year. Part 6 is when it's like a comedy. There's like jokes. There's like it's really trying to make you laugh, and that kind of, I think the first time that lightheartedness really comes in this franchise, which definitely continues into this one.
Okay, yeah, I'll definitely rewatch those. I rewatched the series with my nephew maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, but it's always through a lens of like I'm wondering if he's liking it or not. So if I could just sit back and watch it, yeah, I'm excited to rewatch those again. Uh, So, Richard, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the show. We're going to be continuing our conversation in the post show called the Sunday Sessions. That is Patreon exclusive. Again, my patreon.com/myhorrorprofessional if that's something you're interested in. But Richard, thank you so much for coming on the show. If you could please once again let everybody know how they could support you, how they could follow you, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I had a blast. You can order my novel Trust Me online or at your local stores, or also A Night of Screams, Latino Horror Stories anthology that just came out a couple weeks ago. You can find that in Austin, or you could order it online, lots of other places. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or Blue Sky if you're on there. Richard Z Santos. I'm pretty easy to find out there.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. If you want to follow me, you can follow me on Instagram at myhorrorprofessional, on Twitter at mhcpod. If you'd like to email the show, you can email me at myhorrorconfessional@gmail.com. And of course, the Patreon, patreon.com/myhorrorconfessional. Thank you, everybody, and we will talk to you next week.